I'm pigged on Luka, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren.
Ladies and gents.
Today, we will be getting into the Mavericks 124-121 heartbreaking loss to the Minnesota Timberwolves in Kyrie Irving's debut at the American Airlines Center. It was his first home game as a Dallas Maverick, where he scored 26 points in the fourth quarter in an attempt to lead the Mavericks, who were at one point in the third quarter down by 24 points. It was a valiant effort between him and Luka Doncic down the stretch. Nonetheless, the Mavericks did fall short in their endeavors to try and come back against the Timberwolves, as they had a plethora of defensive woes both on the perimeter and inside. Jaren, give me a debrief on your thoughts from the game.
This was, one of those games where the Mavs are clearly still figuring things out, especially defensively. Anthony Edwards looked like he was well deserving of that all-star spot, and he definitely is. But I think this was a case where, the Mavericks still figuring some things out, especially defensively. It's pretty unacceptable. I want to say they had like over half their points were inside the paint. And I know in the fourth quarter, they just pretty much choked the Mavericks out by scoring inside the paint relatively the whole entire game. Kyrie Irving, amazing fourth quarter. Luka Doncic, amazing game. Christian Wood had an amazing first half. But outside of that, this was just one where I think the Mavs were outplayed because of their lack of sort of chemistry now.
No, I would definitely tend to agree with you on all those points. And we will be getting all into everything regarding this game, from first quarter to fourth quarter, how all the Mavericks role players played, including those top guys, of course. But before we do that, here's an ad from our sponsor, Anchor. All right, so getting into this one, Jaren, the Mavericks obviously started out the game a bit slow. The offense just sort of came to a stalemate in that first quarter. There were just some issues in terms of, Kyrie necessarily not getting an equal sort of share of the pot. It just didn't seem like they had that sort of assertiveness, and as well as the proper splittage between Kyrie and Luka in that first quarter. And they weren't forcing the issue in terms of getting turnovers. There were virtually, no transition opportunities or anything like that. They were operating, solely in the half court. What did you see from the Mavericks after they lost that first quarter 33-23?
Yeah, that just looked like a team that was, came out the gates really slow. Kyrie and Luka, as you mentioned, they just didn't really have a good separation of power. It would be super Kyrie centric at times, and then super Luka centric at times. And majority of the time, it was all Luka running the floor. I just think offensively, it got a little stagnant at times. It didn't help that the Mavericks were missing a lot of shots. I want to say they were like 6 of 21 or 6 of 18, I think it was somewhat less than that. By the end of the first half from 3, and yeah, the fact that there was nothing in transition that was created, there was like zero defense that correlated into offense. There's just really no bright scenarios within that first half other than like Christian Wood going to work. I guess like if you want to highlight one guy in that first half, it would have to be Christian Wood. Outside of that, I guess Luka had a steady half. I don't know what he finished the half with. But Christian Wood, I know he had 18 points in that first half. And that's sort of the guy that I would, kind of highlight towards. But in terms of creating offense, it was just very weird. It was a game where, you could definitely tell that these two guys are trying to figure themselves out, at least together. And that's honestly how the game felt.
Yeah, but it does seem that they did end up figuring that out down the stretch, as they obviously both finished with over, 33 points each. Kyrie with 36, Luka with 33. And the second half, you could definitely sort of see that separation of powers, as you alluded to, and the dynamism between them in terms of how they were splitting every possession, things of that nature, really come into full effect. So much so that on the last possession of the game, they could not decide who should take the last shot. And we'll be getting into that, later on once we get to the fourth quarter and stuff. But you are right in terms of how the offensive flow was seemingly obstructed by that Timberwolves defense. And, McDaniels has always been a really good defender. He's rangy, long. He's one of the better defenders in the NBA. And that, in tandem with the fact that they're blitzing and trapping Luka so much, that, it was a tough order for the Mavericks, because it's not like a normal sort of team that creates those 4-on-3 scenarios. When you create a 4-on-3 scenario with the Timberwolves, you still have Gobert sitting back there. And, haven't even mentioned, of course, Karl Anthony Towns. I forget his exact injury, but he was obviously not even playing in this game. And, just the presence of Gobert down there, you could see how much of a daunting figure that was to, Mavericks ball handlers when they got in the lane at times. And just in terms of how the Mavericks operated in their offense in general, it was a lot more concentrated on trying to work through the corners and the wings. Anytime Dwight or Christian Wood got the ball, in that nail area, having to, if Luka was able to facilitate that to get them the ball in that area in a 4-on-3 scenario, we would see them divert more to, dribbling across that mid-range area to then swing it to the corner for a three. But in most instances, the Mavericks simply just kind of passed out of it and continued to swing it out of the perimeter. They just didn't seem like they had the proper wherewithal to really, stretch the floor on Gobert, especially because lots of Christian Wood's minutes were being mirrored by Naz Reid. And had Christian Wood played a little more against Rudy specifically, I think we could have seen some more instances where the Mavericks could have took a lot more advantages of that drop coverage that, Rudy's playing, and he's, sinking back in. Obviously, he does have the ability to, switch and what have you, given his defensive versatility, that they're not a sort of, they're not a strict drop team by any means. But, in those pick and roll scenarios, he does have the ability to sit back there, and, he's a daunting figure, and there's not much the Mavericks could have done about it. So just kind of speak to his effect in that first half in terms of imposing his defensive will upon the Mavericks.
Yeah, Gobert, he's always been that sort of long, lanky guy. Is it a 3-time or 2-time defensive player of the year?
I believe 2 times, but I'll need to look that up.
Yeah, I think he's a 2-time defense player of the year. And for good reason. I mean, he's an amazing defensive player. Again, sort of what you want to do to counteract his length is spread the floor. Unfortunately, the Mavericks just didn't really have the personnel to do so outside of Christian Wood. But again, his minutes were kind of mirrored with Naz Reid because he was coming off the bench the whole entire time. Now, with that being said, we saw, whenever the Mavericks did drive, whether it be, Kyrie, Josh, even Jane Hardy at times, like it was he's such a daunting figure, as you said, that, they were missing wide open either push shots or, layups or whatever it was. It was just, there's a mental block in your head that's like, okay, there's this guy who can pretty much block any shot on the floor, who's looming in the background, and you just don't know where he is. And that has to, that's in the back of your mind, basically. And we saw multiple times where guys were missing easy shots, either short or long or whatever it was. I think defensively, he just did an amazing job of, pretty much sticking to the paint. And during the first half, nothing really, got inside. The only real points the Mavericks got were from, like, really just Christian Wood. I think that was and Luka. Like, those were really the only points that the Mavericks could generate in that first half. But yeah, I think, his figure is just such a daunting guy to be in. You stick him in the paint, like, there's really not much you can do. And we saw that at times, especially in the second half is where I really noticed it with like Josh Green and guys like that. Like, the easy shots were just being, short or whatever it was. And it's just because that's who he is. He's that much of a figure that he's in the back of your head no matter what.
Yeah. Next up, I kind of want to get in some guys that were either rumored to be traded or they were actually traded on the Timberwolves. And in these two instances, let's look specifically at like Naz Reid and Mike Conley here. And I thought Naz Reid, he was, outside of Kyle Anderson, who we'll get into it in a second, I thought definitely brought a sort of jolt to the Timberwolves offensively, just in terms of having a big at his size who was able to, he only had 10 points, but he seemingly was able to, bully and blow past Christian Wood at will. And lots of Christian Wood's buckets tonight were by virtue of him, getting a switch or a mismatch onto somebody else, like a Jalen Noel or an Austin Rivers, somebody like that. He honestly wasn't, directly matched up on Naz Reid when Christian Wood was on offense. And that speaks to Naz Reid's versatility as a player, being that switchable five who can also, shoot it as well as occasionally drive it from the perimeter. He only played 12 minutes tonight, but I wanted to point him out to just highlight the amount of guys that the Timberwolves are able to throw out conversely to the Mavericks, who, that's their third big man in their rotation. After, if you want to count McDaniels as one, that's their fourth. And he would probably be the starting center on the Mavericks. So just in terms of the interior defense tonight and the, as well as the lack of perimeter defense, is this some sort of all-encompassing issue that's strictly personnel based, or do you think the Mavericks are going to be able to tend to it with this current roster?
I think this is something where you have to alarm the bells, because me personally, I believe that this is personnel. We've seen it all year, where teams, when they decide to take advantage of the paint, they pretty much can whenever they want to. We saw it in this one where Minnesota, I want to say they had over half their points inside the paint. And, to me, like I said, I think that's personnel. You can do all the rotations you want, but whenever it comes down to it, if you have guys like Naz Reid who are just such encompassing figures down low where they can pretty much do whatever they want because they're that big, there's really not much you can do. Now, with that being said, there's not, I guess you can throw JaVale, but even JaVale has his moments, and we've seen it all year, where he just can't be that guy. And so really the personnel on this team and on this roster, you just can't compete with, Naz Reid. I know Gobert is not the most dominant figure down low, but he went 9 of 9 tonight. And he was pretty much catching anything over, most of the time when it was him dominating offensively, the Mavs were running that small ball unit, in which, Mike Conley would just throw it up to him and it would be wide open dunk for obvious reasons, because you have, oftentimes just Theo Pinson guarding him. But yeah, I just think, the way that the Timberwolves were able to get inside the paint was just so nonchalant that it didn't even look like they were trying at times. I really wanted to get into Anthony Edwards because he looked amazing in this game, really through the whole game. And just how dominant he was getting inside the paint. He made Reggie look like an awful defender at times.
Yeah.
And I know this wasn't Reggie's best game, but still, like, Reggie is usually pretty comparable on defense, and he just looked like he was lost half the time. Anthony, that's kind of funny. He was just using a mix of strength and finesse, like to just knock him off balance and just to get an easy, like, sort of push shot or a fade or whatever it was, or just to get an easy layup.
Yeah. He did a really good job snaking in the pick and roll as well.
Yeah.
But some of the things that just really impressed me was there was some shot making that I saw from him tonight from that mid-range area that was just a huge contrast to what we would have seen maybe even a year ago. He has really evolved into a 3-level scorer to the effect of which I honestly did not foresee. So that's a big, props, and, give him all the flowers for that. But as I was mentioning earlier, like regarding Conley, because, when I was talking about those, guys that were either rumored to be in trades or one that had been traded, of course, and with Conley, the addition to, Minnesota, you can definitely see, especially with a team that, has Edwards to really spearhead that playmaking and ball handler role, as well as, Cat on occasion. I thought Conley played excellent just in terms of, being that savvy, veteran, team defender, as well as just setting up their offense in its entirety. He had 12 points and 9 assists, and it wasn't really the most flashy of performances. But I thought he really definitely put a knife in the Mavericks' ability to play defense because, I mean, admittedly, the Mavericks' point of attack defense was terrible tonight, really from all parties. Even Josh Green, I thought, really didn't have his best defensive game. That's not something I can say with normalcy. He's really turned into this sort of ancillary cog that is, paramount to the Mavericks' defensive success. But even he was kind of getting beat pretty oft at the point of attack tonight. And I thought Mike Conley did an excellent job just in terms of how he was furbishing and setting up every single offensive set. I mean, had they had Cat tonight, I don't know, exactly if we're comparing, fit one for one here, what the final score would have been. But this Timberwolves team, in terms of their 31-29 record, comparing that to how they fared in this game, it almost looked like a stark contrast from what you've heard in terms of the mainstream media this year in regards to their team. How do you think about how they just gelled in general? Because, I mean, I thought that they looked excellent tonight. We'll obviously get into what the Mavericks did wrong, of course, but the Timberwolves as a whole, I thought really they were just so synchronized together more so than it appears if you're looking at this. If you only read the coattails and the headlines and stuff on NBA Twitter, you would just probably never have expected this performance.
Yeah, you have to give credits where it's due. In Minnesota, they played a hell of a game. They came out with energy, and really from the point of attack to really the end of the game, outside of those like middle sort of fourth quarter minutes where the Mavs are just getting back in it, Minnesota was, they had the upper hand in terms of energy, and that's what led to so many easy buckets and just easy defensive stops. I know the Mavericks, they didn't have like a whole lot of turnovers, but even still, the defensive presence that Minnesota's playing with, just rotationally, and even stopgapping the paint sometimes, it looked really, really good. And I admit that I don't know a whole lot about this Minnesota team. I just know, sort of on paper things. So I guess, as you say, the mainstream stuff. So I wasn't really knowing, what I was kind of going into, but they looked really, really good. And this is I think this is a win that you can definitely build off of if you're Minnesota. I know, we're going to get back into the Mavs part of it, but yeah, they played really, really good. And I think that they found something. I think that this sort of trade where many thought that they had lost it, where, you're trading D'Lo for Mike Conley, and I think that was maybe it in like a second round pick or something. I think many, on paper were like, okay, that's a terrible trade, but that's the guy that sort of, gels that offense. And we saw first case here, like he's doing his job. He did it in Utah for a while, and he did it in Memphis so well that, I think now that he's able to, kind of bring a veteran presence to such a young team is really cool. And especially, to see it firsthand, like that's a good team. And they're going to be scary in the playoffs. I think that's for sure.
Yeah, especially as they incorporate Karl Anthony Towns into that whole mixture and figure out how to, best utilize some of those lineups. I really do think the tide is turning for them, contrary to some of the, national media stuff going on with them, right? How were the Mavericks able to sort of turn the tide? We obviously talked about their woes really throughout quarters 1 through 3, if we're going to encompass it all together. How were they able to turn the tide towards the tail end of that third quarter, and that fourth quarter, of course? And what was seemingly keeping them from obviously being able to grab the lead? Was it just the lack of an ability to get a stop? Was it just the inability to score enough? Like what was basically preventing the Mavericks from being able to get this one over the finish line, as they were down 24 at one point in the third quarter and cut the lead all the way down to 3 towards the end of the fourth quarter?
Yeah, offensively, things just started clicking. I think the Mavs finally deferred to one guy over the other. And that's still saying that doesn't, I guess, do what happened justice, because even still, I would say they more so deferred to Kyrie in that fourth quarter.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you there, but I also want to push back that
That's why I
I
was
do
like,
think that
still
they were able to
encompass
synchronize
both. Yeah.
Kyrie and Luka's offensive fit together as well.
No, and that's why I was trying to tread lightly while saying that.
Yeah.
Because Luka still found a way to, score within the offense and also, facilitate in his ways. But Kyrie, just the explosive points that he was having at such valuable times is kind of what led to, him having 26 points in that fourth quarter. I think that was really the big thing is the Mavericks really started clicking offensively. And, we know how sort of, I guess, black hole type-esque that this team can be on defense. Well, whenever your offense is clicking, we've seen it many, many times, the defense will click as well. And that's kind of what we saw. We saw the defense clicking along with the offense as the offense came into rhythm. And Kyrie was playing amazing. I think if you're going to point to one guy that got you back in the game, you have to point towards him. I know, Luke had an amazing game, but this was the first game probably all season where you look at the box sheet or the box sheet and you're like, there's another guy that's along there with Luka. And that's definitely Kyrie. But I think, kind of what prevented them from, crossing the finish line ultimately. I don't think it was more so one event that you can point towards, like that final 15-second possession. You can't really point towards that. You have to look at sort of how the game evolved, and it was just kind of stupid turnovers. The Mavericks kind of shot themselves in the foot at times. And even still, they passing the ball a little too much. That's sort of something that I've noticed with this team. Now with now with Kyrie, it's sort of like who can get, and I know it's not like a meme, but like who can get sort of like the most amount of assists or who can, get the best pass. And that's sort of kind of what it's just an around the world scenario where every pass doesn't need to be had. And that's what we kind of see.
Yeah, I saw some discourse on Twitter regarding Luka seemingly always needing to dribble after he catches the ball where he has a catch and shoot opportunity. So I do think there's some credence to that, but I mean, I think mainly their downfall came on the defensive end.
Yeah.
As just time after time, they were unable to stop Timberwolves pick and rolls, especially between Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert, obviously more so in that first half where they simply would bring, whatever big men, whether it be Wood or Powell, up to the level of the screen and at that point, just trap Edwards to where he would just make a pass to Gobert in the lane and it was an easy dunk because whoever's the weak side, help that was rotating over was just simply not big enough to contest Gobert. And the Timberwolves were just being benefactors out of that offense for a long time because they know obviously like Christian Wood or Dwight Powell, if you just Gobert can seal both of those guys easily, and that seemed to be the most prominent figure of their offense throughout most of the first half. But the Mavericks started blitzing Gobert in that fourth quarter, and that started to definitely alleviate some of the, pressure at the rim. We saw the Timberwolves score a little less at the rim. And that was a key component, I thought, of the Mavericks getting back in the game. But by doing that, that also concedes, some of these mid-range jump shots or, Anthony Edwards or, even a Mike Conley being able to sort of really succinct into some of these, mid-range jump shots or, around moving the ball around the perimeter to get an open three. The Mavericks went to zone at points throughout this game. They were mildly successful in their endeavors there. The Timberwolves still were able to get some open threes amidst that Maverick zone, but they did have a few possessions where they were able to knock the ball loose. It just didn't seem as if the Mavericks necessarily to your point, which I do think that this is a personnel issue at the end of the day, it just necessarily didn't seem like the Mavericks had the personnel and the wherewithal to defend this Timberwolves team, because if they patched one hole, then they, then they open another one up, because, you obviously take away Gobert, then, that creates this sort of domino effect by you blitzing him to where you're late on a closeout to Anthony Edwards or a Jalen McDaniels or a Mike Conley, to where they're able to sort of just comfortably sink into a mid-range jump shot, or they're able to attack the rim. And the Mavericks just don't have the defensive personnel to recover and play a scheme like that. And, their small ball scheme was mildly successful. The Timberwolves did only have 24 points in that fourth quarter. I thought a lot of that may have been the shock factor. They were missing some easy ones down the stretch, just once the Mavericks diverted to that defense. But, I do think that there's credence to the fact that if the Mavericks, would have just played the Timberwolves straight up, and had they not gone to that defense, they, very well could have easily got blown out. So, I think that definitely helped them get back into the game. But in terms of the sustainability of, that comes with that, especially the way Edwards started to get going late in the game, as well as some of those other guys, it's just kind of sketchy from that perspective. And you would hope that, they can address these issues in the offseason and things of that nature, or hopefully even within this season. And I guess that's my next question to you. Do you think that this Mavericks team is going to be able to address these issues within this season?
To be honest, the way that things are looking, I just don't really see a way that the Mavericks can seemingly address every hole possible. I know there's not a perfect roster, maybe outside of Boston, but there's really not a perfect
Boston's
roster.
A perfect roster. Boston's
a perfect roster. Outside of Boston, there's not a perfect NBA roster. And you look at the Mavs, they might have, in terms of contending teams, if you list them as a contender, they probably have the biggest holes on the roster. I just don't think that there's one guy or multiple guys for that matter that you can bring on, at least in the buyout market, that will sort of, I guess, alleviate every problem that you have. Because again, like you said, in this game too, where you stopgap one problem, you start a whole nother train of other problems, which in this game, as you said, was mid-range or even wide open threes. This is just sort of what we're going to have to deal with. I think it's more so, how is the offense going to outscore their offense? That's seemingly the trend that is we're kind of going down. But I think, with the addition of, Justin Holiday, I know we'll probably have a later podcast about him alone. But with the addition of Justin Holiday, I think that, it's a step in the right move to, sort of, I guess, show that you're trying to improve the defense. But then again, there's not really much that you can do, especially in the buyout market. There's not one guy I think that can bring anything, to one need. I just don't think there is. But in the offseason, that's a whole nother discussion. I think that we have plenty of time to discuss that in later endeavors. But yeah, I think that this is just something that the Mavericks are going to have to live with for the remainder of the 22-23 season.
I think they can remediate some of these issues by virtue of, being able to strengthen their rotations a little bit and really hone in on those defensive rotations, especially, and that comes obviously down to head coach Jason Kidd. I mentioned on Twitter that I was going to go off on him in the podcast, so I will. I'm saving that just for in a segment or two, and that is going to be a happenstance tonight still. But nonetheless, I guess we'll sort of catalyze this whole Jason Kidd spiel with one of his quotes tonight, right? And when I do agree with your sentiments that the Mavericks defense, in terms of being able to improve drastically, is going to have to come this offseason, whether at the draft or, throughout the offseason via trade. It's in one of those instances, because obviously the Mavericks are over the cap. But I do think that they can at least marginally improve this year by, one of those buyout guys being added in replacing the Theo spot, as well as maybe Markieff Morris or AJ Lawson being implemented in certain lineups at certain points of the game. I do think that there's not fixes, but definitely some sort of halfway cures that they could provide to this that they're simply not realizing yet. And Jason Kidd is notoriously, sort of inept in terms of his inability to adapt, or I guess a better way to say that would be how long he takes to adapt, rather. And, I think that this quote is definitely emblematic of that. He sort of seems like he's having a concession here. Callie Kaplan denotes on Twitter when she posted this, that this was a complete shift in mindset from him from even like 2 weeks ago in terms of how he's viewing the Mavericks defense. But I'll read this quote here, and I want to get your thoughts from it, Jaren, because this was mildly alarming to me, at least. So this was Callie Kaplan when she asked about the concerns for the Mavs defense, and this was Jason Kidd's response. No, we're here to outscore people. People come to see the points, not 80 to 80. We're here to score. This is the new NBA. Interior defense, we'll figure it out. That was a real quote from Jason Kidd.
That's Mark Cuban right there. I don't know.
Yeah.
That does not sound like Jason Kidd.
Nope, he 100% said that.
I did not know that there he even said that tonight. I mean, that's like the last guy you would expect him to say that. But
yeah,
I think he's trying to be kind of cynical in saying it. I don't think he's actually keeping that to heart. I hope he's not. Yeah, I don't know.
Admittedly, I haven't heard the interview, so I don't know the exact context of the quote to your point, but I do think it is mildly alarming to an extent, especially having recognized that they lost one of their better defenders in Dorian Finney-Smith. Do you think that this is a concession from Jason Kidd that the roster that he has been equipped with simply just does not have the wherewithal to get it done defensively?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes is the easy answer, but to dive a little deeper, like you have to do what not have to do, but you have to like make the best of what you're given. And I don't think he's done that. I know that's what your point was whenever I was just trying to say like personnel problems are going to have to improve for this team to get better on defense. But you do have a point that, internally you can marginally improve on the defensive side. And that's what, is going to have to happen if the Mavericks want to make a deep playoff run this year. I think that quote's definitely kind of scary if he was meaning it and, it wasn't trying to be funny or cynical or anything like that. I think that is definitely a little alarming. But that's sort of one where as a head coach, I feel like you just have to you have to make the best of what you're handed. And, I don't think this is a bad group of guys by any means, but defensively is definitely the big hole in this one. We saw it last year where, you look on paper, there's really not like one great defensive player outside of like Dorian on that team and maybe Reggie, if you consider him that. But this year, like it's a little different. Like you don't have those guys, but even still, you can make the rotations, you can make the system pretty locked down. And that's what we saw last year. I don't know what's happened in between then and now. I know like the personnel, like I said, has changed quite a bit, but even still, I think you can instill some sort of DNA that resolved from that to now. And I personally don't feel like we've seen a whole lot of that.
Yeah, no, I think I would tend to agree with you from that standpoint. But also just in terms of what the defensive ceiling is for this team, I think that the Mavericks ceiling as a whole is obviously, it obviously coincides with their defensive ceiling, but I do think that the defensive ceiling for this team and specifically is like maybe slightly above middle of the pack if they can really get everything to synchronize. Once Maxey gets back from injury and, their Justin Holiday really comes up to speed, because they just don't have that consistent rim protection that we have obviously hoped for and, pined for. And JaVale can provide that in spurts, of course, but he played 1 minute and 51 seconds tonight, and it was some of the worst interior defense I think I've ever seen. So in spurts is the key word there in terms of his ability to, furbish his presence inside, as well as being able to guard, those ensuing ball handlers and wings that are trying to penetrate inside. Right. So just in regards to that, I think that, I wouldn't necessarily say that puts a definite cap on this Mavericks team, because once they really get this offense figured out and, it's only game one at home that Luka and Kyrie played together, and they were excellent down the stretch together, barring the last possession. And they combined for 69 points tonight. Sorry. But I mean, nonetheless, like I do think the offense to an extent can compensate for how egregiously bad the defense gets at times. I just think that their best bet is to just eliminate these like absolute monstrosity defensive performances, to where at least there's just a little more sort of valiant effort and velour in which they're playing with, just a little more. I mean, I don't even want to, knock them in terms of their effort and stuff, but I do think that just eliminating these a little more, because, this isn't a team that's going to have those insane positive defensive nights where they're constantly shutting opponents under 100 points like last season. They just simply just don't have the wherewithal, especially with Dorian gone stuff, but they can definitely eliminate some of these batter nights, and that can trend them towards middle of the pack. And that coupled with, an insane offensive versatility, that can net you the ability to beat almost any team, but they at least have to get that defense to middle of the pack, in my opinion.
No, I would agree. I think that this team at its cap is like a top 16, top 17 defensive team. Can they reach that point? That's sort of, it has yet to be seen. But this team is still figuring some things out, especially post Kyrie trade. So I'm intrigued to see. But again, if they can get to that sort of 17, 15 mark in terms of defensive rating, I think that would be sort of where that this team could sniff the Western Conference playoffs again.
No, 100%. And next up, I kind of wanted to get just in terms of, how the Mavericks were able to close this one down the stretch. Obviously, Kyrie had an insane fourth quarter where we really saw the, 3-level versatility that he provides to an offense be on full display. He was pulling up from 3 in transition. He was getting to the rim amidst a flurry, a conglomerate of Timberwolves defenders down there. He was just pulling up in the mid-range, just essentially nickel and diming guys to pieces till he could just really just like shoot in their face. They weren't even running like a bunch of staggers or zoom actions to get him open off ball. He was bringing up the ball up the court, sort of definitely something different than what we've seen most of the time. We see, in a lot of these non-Luka minutes, we'll see like Theo or Josh bring the ball up the court, but Kyrie was the one to bring that one up the court, and he simply took over the game from all aspects. Even defensively, he was locked into an absolute T. One play that was, I think, really emblematic of how just absolutely dialed in he was when he got, I believe, his own offensive rebound. I can't remember the exact instance of what happened, but he shot a shot at the rim, and then I think another Maverick either tipped it up or was able to get another follow-up attempt where Kyrie then got his own offensive rebound. And amidst a flurry of like 3 Timberwolves defenders, he just put the ball up on the perfect place on the backboard, got a little layup up. He all the while, anytime the Mavericks got a stop, which seemed very seldom amidst this, obviously they closed the fourth quarter on a 39-24 margin and over the Timberwolves, but it almost seemed as if they couldn't get a stop for the life of them at points in this one. But anytime that they did have those transition opportunities or long misses from the Timberwolves, Kyrie was pushing the tempo. He was pulling up in transition. Just a sort of, all-encompassing offensive performance that we were sort of sorely awaiting from him in a Mavericks uniform. And I don't think it couldn't have come at a better time than within this home debut. Jaren, just talk to the effect that Kyrie was able to take over the game in that fourth quarter, scoring 26 points, the most points in a quarter by any Maverick this season. And, he is the highest scoring points per game, average guy in the fourth quarter out of anybody in the NBA. What sort of dynamic does he add when he's able to get going to this effect to this Mavericks team?
You said it right. That was pure dominance from a 3-level scoring point of view. And that's just another perspective of 3-point scoring, or of a 3-level scoring. That's kind of what he brings to the table, especially whenever he's going off as he did in the fourth quarter. A guy that can just, stir some things up. Like it kind of seemed like Luka was used as like a back pocket tool, where if things slowed up, you give it to Luka and he goes to work. Whenever things were going right, and not to say that they weren't going right whenever it was in Luka's hands, because they definitely were, but when things were going really right, it was transition threes, Kyrie, grabbing offensive boards, tip-ins, whatever it was, he was doing amazing things. Like he was out jumping the likes of Jaden McDaniels, Gobert sometimes. Like he was out jumping guys that were well, 6'8", well worth his height.
And that's just like simply like being able to ball spot, having the intangibles to, get the ball at its peak. He just seems so good at everything that requires a sort of ultra presence of mind that the typical basketball player wouldn't have.
No, exactly. And that's, we knew that the Mavericks sorely needed this, of course, but to this extent, I mean, we're getting, someone that can, okay, like in a Mavericks uniform, I don't think I've ever seen anyone just pull up from three that casually and drain them. That's just incredible to me. The volume at which he can score is just incredible, especially with how acrobatic some of his finishes are. He didn't really have to do anything too touchy tonight in terms of acrobatic finishes, but he had some tough shots, including the one that, Will described a minute ago. And some, of course, transition threes that were incredible to watch. But I think, just that sort of, I guess, like hyper extensive offense in which he can bring, where it's just tempo, it's different. And, whenever you get a team to slow down and then you give it to Luka, like that's just two different sort of schemes that you have to you have to not look forward to, but you have to sort of defend. And that's just so different, transition defense, where they probably the fastest guy on the court, or maybe even in the league now, being Kyrie Irving. And then of course you have Luka, who slows it up, and then he gets his offense in however he wants to. I just think that's sort of what, really I witnessed, was how different the offense worked. And it was working at a T every time. It didn't matter whose hands it was in. It was working, but it was really fun to watch Kyrie go to work. And of course, 26 points that led every Maverick in terms of scoring in a quarter. And it was really fun to see, like I said.
Yeah. And I mean, in his post-game interview, Kyrie accredits his teammates, for his resolve in those situations, being able to be along, just being alongside them is what specifically gets him going, which, obviously is emblematic of his selflessness and other things of that nature. And he also, he's just such a humble guy, so long as the media, of course, isn't dipping into those outside, off the court things. And I mean, obviously there are times when those situations are warranted, of course. But, for simply, ridiculing sake and, just nagging a guy to nag a guy, the Dallas media has done a fairly decent job of not doing that. That he pushed back today when they were asking about his long-term future in Dallas and potential contract extensions, things of that nature, saying he didn't want it to be a distraction, which, I mean, I applaud that. And there obviously are times where Kyrie should rightfully come under fire if he's doing some weird stuff off the court that is offensive to a group or something of that nature. But in instances where, people are just simply like ridiculing his way of life, or, really hunting for a way to expose him, that obviously is just, too much and unprofessional. And I mean, I think the Dallas media has done a fairly good job, all things considered, outside of a select few. And, he seems generally like pretty happy here, and he seems very humble from his experience. He went on to say post game that, he was sorry to the city of Dallas and everything, for not getting the win. And he was just like emotionally torn after having expelled so much energy in that fourth quarter and not coming away with the victory and everything. And just in terms of how the last play played out, it was all a weird sort of conundrum to him. So, I mean, this is a guy who, emptied the tank, and obviously the Mavericks fell short with that last and final possession with him and Luka. They were doing a good job splitting the reps. And I mean, you alluded to this earlier, but just the way that I think their sort of dynamism is going to be able to operate together in terms of, letting one person take heed versus the other. I mean, I really think it kind of just depends on who has it going, right? Like if Luka's more hot, he's going to be that primary ball handler, with, Kyrie to be the guy who is, more so inclined to attack off closeouts off a Luka double team, or make something happen as a bailout guy late in the shot clock, or, they can even work off ball with each other. And, they can, there are instances where Luka can set a screen for him. Kyrie there can be plays ran for him, with Luka as the lead ball handler, you run staggers and zoom actions and horns actions with Kyrie. I mean, there's just a lot of different ways to involve them together for any of the narratives or discourse out there that they just can't play together. But in terms of how they operated together down the stretch, I mean, we really saw that, effect really come into fruition, where one guy would, take specifically Kyrie in this instance, because he was so hot, he would take the bulk of the offensive possessions, but Luka, because he obviously, I wouldn't say he wasn't hot, but he obviously wasn't just as insanely on fire, of course, as Kyrie was, with his 26 points in that fourth quarter. We saw him, kind of defer a little bit more and, sort of serve as that release valve, more so when Kyrie couldn't get something going. And that is the sort of effect that I was really looking for. And they seem to have succeeded at that, barring the final possession, which, let's address the elephant in the room. Obviously, the Mavericks, in an out of timeout scenario, after being down 3, after having this comeback, having been down 24 from the Timberwolves, in large part due to their ability to, blitz Gobert, like I'd referenced earlier, along with some, Kyrie's just absolute, insanity in terms of his ability to, display his 3-level scoring in that fourth quarter. And, some benefits from some negative regression in terms of some Timberwolves shooting led the Mavericks to this position to where they were at, with about 14 seconds left, down 3, some fortunate misses on the free throw line from the Timberwolves, where Conley missed one. The Mavericks are down 3, 124 to 121 with about 14 seconds left. They inbound the ball. Theo Pinson is the one inbounding the ball in this situation. That's another topic of discussion when we get into Jason Kidd's rotations here in a second. But nonetheless, he throws somewhat of an errant pass. Not Jared Vanderbilt. I always confuse him with Jalen McDaniels. Jalen McDaniels is able to pick it off to an extent. He chases Luka into the backcourt, almost gets it. Luka, who kind of appears a little bit more laborsome or out of shape ever since getting that heel contusion, he's able to just barely secure the ball. He brings it back up the court. And then I think between Kyrie and Luka, they pass it to each other like 3 or 4 times, sort of deciding who's going to take that last shot. There was not an easy shot to be had, to their credit. Anthony Edwards and Jalen McDaniels did a great job of swarming and hedging and recovering, and trapping in those scenarios. It was a sort of lateral quickness and defensive intensity that seemed only amplified given the situation to, what they're usually able to produce, but which is, pretty damn good defense, especially for McDaniels. So, what were your thoughts on that last possession, Jaren? Are you writing this off as more so a out of timeout scenario towards the end of the game that's something that's solvable, especially given that track record of that fourth quarter where Luka and Kyrie worked so well down the stretch? Or do you think, given that this is 2 games in a row now, we also saw, not this specific scenario where they're passing the ball back and forth between each other, but we did see the Mavericks have some woes in the clutch versus the Kings, where Luka had that step back 3 that went off and there was seemingly no other play drawn up there. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the Mavericks, clutch time woes. And do you think that there's going to be a solvent to this, or do you think this might be some sort of perpetual issue that bugs them?
Yeah, first off, I do want to address the fact that Minnesota played that possession very well. I do want to give them credit because, again, the Mavs didn't even get off a single shot in that sort of 15-second scenario. But outside of that, what really angers me is the fact that the Mavericks had a timeout, and this was sort of a possession that was doomed from the start. I feel like, the second that ball goes in the backcourt, you retain possession and you get it stopped, you take a timeout there, you rethink things, you have 9 seconds to sort of work the ball and, however you want to work it, which, 9 times out of 10 is still going to be a Luka step back 3. But, with Kyrie in the lineup, this was the big thing I think that stuck out to the most casual of fans, is that now Luka, of course he's going to get help, but he's going to get help in the clutch. And that's, the scenarios like this is what you have Kyrie for, and we just didn't even see that used. Do I think that this was sort of a one-off scenario where, they'll figure it out? I will lean on that side. But from a coaching standpoint, the fact that there was a timeout that, wasn't even used, where you had possession for every single second of that 15 seconds. That's the most frustrating part to me, because that was a doomed possession from the start. And I mean, like I said, there's really nothing that you can do. It was a scramble possession, and it just kind of, as many are saying, it was a hot potato possession.
Yeah.
I think the second you see that first pass to Kyrie and then the pass back is where you call your timeout and just get a breather, rethink things, and drop a different play. But outside of that, having Theo being your inbound guy, I think that's something to be said. I don't know how much in depth you want to go into that, but that's pretty funny. But yeah, like I said, I what really pisses me off is just the coaching standpoint of it, where you have a timeout to be used, you drop that play in the first place.
It wasn't really a play, to be honest with you.
It wasn't a play, but you knew where it was going to go.
And but I think that's really the matter of the whole discourse surrounding this thing, right? Is like, we've seen Luka seemingly have to just bail the Mavericks out in these late game scenarios since his rookie year, where he just throws shit up and there's not even an actual play drawn. And I'm not saying the days of that are over there. I mean, if there's like 1 second left and you have nothing else to do, like, obviously, but when you have the wherewithal and the resourcefulness and the time to be able to actually get a better shot off, and you have these
and you have a dude who scored 26 points in the fourth quarter.
You have these two dynamic, playmakers and shot creators. You want to use something where, draw up something where you're using one of them as a decoy, whether it be Luka or Kyrie. And, you use some off-ball actions, maybe some staggers to get one of them open, use, some pin downs. Like, there are some different nooks and crannies that Jason Kidd could implement within these out of timeout scenarios. We've seen him do it when it's not the last possession of the game, but for whatever reason, I'm not saying that, I don't want to take my chances with Luka or Kyrie shooting a step back three to win the game. Like, by all means, like, I'll take my chances with them over a lot of the guys on the Mavericks roster. The issue isn't who's taking the shot. It's the shot that's to be had. You might as well, even if these are the best players on the planet, you give yourself statistically a better chance if you're getting a better look. Like, and when you just throw it to these guys and, they pass the ball to each other back and forth at the top of the key with, really nothing else to do. I mean, how much can you blame them versus the coaching staff for not drawing a play? Sure, obviously one of them should have got a shot up, and that's an indictment upon them for not being more selfish in that situation, still figuring out how to play with each other. But I mean, this is really a call to action for Jason Kidd to be able to draw, a play up for once in those scenarios. Or obviously, if it's a second or two left in the game and you just got to get a shot off, like, yes, just inbound it and obviously step back three, but in scenarios where you can draw a play, you might as well, because you give yourself a better chance, even if you're dealing with guys that can shoot off the dribble capably. That's sort of where I lie on that issue. And, now that we're just sort of in the thick of it, let's go ahead and get into the Jason Kidd rant, I guess. I'll hear your thoughts on it first, Jaren. But Jason Kidd is obviously, there have been some, ever since the Kyrie trade, there have been some sort of intricacies in the rotation that, I mean, fans on Twitter are obviously kind of frowning upon, particularly Christian Wood's role. Ever since his thumb fracture, he's been a complete black hole on defense, comparable to what he used to be on defense. But at the same time, his offense seems as if it's still up to speed to where it was at pre-injury. So the managing of his minutes have been something that's come under fire. Obviously, Theo Pinson's implementation into the rotation, his lack of point of attack defense, but also, those weird offensive jolts he'll provide every once in a while, or seemingly what it appears Jason Kidd's clinging to. There aren't just all negatives across the board here, but there obviously are some trade-offs that we would probably like to see. Maybe the ability, for instance, to stagger Christian Wood's minutes in the waning moments of the game to where he's playing a few more offensive possessions, but not those defensive possessions. You could have Palin for that. In Theo Pinson's instance, maybe whatever Theo is giving you offensively is good and all, but because of the, him getting beat at the point of attack, you might want an AJ Lawson or even a Markieff Morris to defend some of those bigger wings out there just for defensive sake. for a team that's so sorely deprived of defense. So obviously Jason Kidd's kind of coming under fire a little bit by the fan base here with some of these issues. What are your thoughts on them and how he is running his rotations at the moment?
Yeah, I think rightfully so. He's being, under fire. I think, you can always use the excuse of, hey, this team just made a huge trade. He's still trying to figure out this lineup. But at the same time, there is clear answers that are being given night in and night out. And that's, to this point where we were having this same conversation the first 25 games of the year where should Christian Wood start? Should Christian Wood get more minutes? I mean, this is sort of the same argument that we're going back to. I think he deserves it. His defense has been atrocious since he got back, but if Jason Kidd's quotes, post game tonight are, any truth, then why not send Christian Wood out there? Why not?
That's a really good point. That's a really good point.
Why not play him more? And it's just okay, Theo Pinson, I love Theo and all. I don't think there's one guy that hates Theo with a passion. But having him play 18 minutes a game where, he seemingly just, what does he offer you?
I think that he offers a few
played
different
good.
things
He's played good, but
I referenced him in one of the previous podcasts. It might have been the solo podcast. He's like the ultimate utility guy from the standpoint that Theo is average at everything. There's not one thing that he excels in. And in the NBA, in a role-dominated league where you have to excel in a certain role, unless you're a star player where you're good at everything, then you're going to be, you're kind of relegated to a lot of the time being out of a rotation if you're a sort of player like him. But at the same time, if we're getting really intricate about this, he's obviously probably worse defensively than he is offensively. At least offensively, he'll provide you that, occasional sort of momentum three, or, he does have good intangibles as a cutter. I'll say that much. So, they'll run some pin downs where he'll come on and make a V cut. He had a good V cut in that Sacramento game. So, he has some different things he's good at, but what he's bringing to the table offensively does not override, the lack of point of attack defense. He did have one great block against Terrence Davis in that second Sacramento game, but barring that, it's been a lot of conceding and getting blown by for the most part, and not necessarily getting lost in rotations. He tries hard, but he just doesn't have the foot speed to be able to hang with a lot of these guys on defense necessarily. He's savvy. He's not a terrible off-ball defender or a help defender. He even had that one block dunk on McDaniels tonight that I don't think should have been called a foul. But but they're obviously his on-ball defense just is not able to supplement for some of the other woes. And you would probably rather just have the interjection of a guy that's more role defined, like an AJ Lawson or a Markieff Morris. And I think that's the main sort of indictment that fans are putting upon Jason Kidd in terms of his play with Theo. But I think that the Wood thing is even more interesting because I'm not even in the camp that I think Wood should start the moment. I think the defense is so bad that you have to play Powell in that starting lineup. And honestly, split their minutes however which way you want. But against the opposing team's best offensive players, I think that Dwight needs to be the sort of big men spearheading those minutes. But at the same time, you have to find a way to incorporate Wood when he's doing so good offensively throughout a game like this, to where he can get some more offensive possessions down the stretch, because that could have been a release valve amidst, such a heavy load that Kyrie and Luka are having to burden. Now, admittedly, that's not like it used to be where it was just Luka's having to bear all the load. Yes, there's two guys now, but Wood could have opened up things and stretched the floor a little bit more had the Mavericks had him in on some of those offensive possessions, or just in a few spurts in the fourth quarter. And those are the main things I wanted to address with the whole Jason Kidd thing. Otherwise I'm not, I'm definitely concerned about that quote, to say the least. But barring that, there wasn't just a whole lot. I guess the inconsistency with playing JaVale and everything, JaVale had one or two times he got beat and he was gone after that. But it's more so managing of the big men rotation, specifically Wood's minutes and as well as that 9th or 10th spot. Hopefully Justin Holiday sort of relegates Theo to the bench and we don't even have to have that argument. But I would just really like to see AJ Lawson or Markieff Morris get thrown a bone over Theo, because I just think that they have such more clearly defined roles on this team, in my opinion.
Yeah, the most frustrating thing to me is that Theo Pinson's playing clutch time minutes over Christian Wood in a game like this. Look, I mean, the role that Theo has been given, I think he's flourished in it, especially for the player that he is. And, the fact that pretty much everyone's written him off as an NBA player, I think that he's flourished in that role. But even still, playing the minutes that he is playing, I just don't see much value in it. And he has his spurts. I think that's what, I think that's what Jason Kidd is playing for, is like one spurt that he has. And to Theo's credit is he does show up, but it's only for 2 minutes out of 18 minutes that he's given. And being the main facilitator, not facilitator, but the main inbounder on a game defining play is not where I feel comfortable having Theo Pinson.
Yeah, 100%. And with that, I guess we'll leave our kid discourse for another day in terms of going off on him, but there are some things that I think we can both agree need to be remediated. And given the slow adapter that Jason Kidd is, let's see if he makes any changes in terms of the rotation, because if it's the same old, especially going into this break with the Nuggets, then I think some eyebrows are definitely going to be raised in terms of not his position on the team, but just in terms like, what is he doing with this rotation? There are definitely some things that I think he may come under fire for. But nonetheless, let's look into how some of the other guys played tonight. We obviously kind of covered Kyrie's whole fourth quarter, episodic saga extensively, but we didn't really talk too much about Luka's game tonight. I'll keep it fairly brief, but I think this is the best game out of he's only played 2 since coming back from injury, but this is definitely better than the other night versus the Kings. There wasn't as much of a fall off in terms of production. He does look a bit laborsome out there, almost as if he let himself go a little bit during his injury, but he was doing a really good job rebounding in this one. There's still some turnover issues, and I still think he's really getting in sync from the passing perspective, just from not being able to be as explosive and have that extra step, once he's, on those penetrating kicks is, essential. And, hence we've seen the passing fall off a little bit, but he was doing a really good job using the post to his advantage in this one. And, attacking off closeouts. I thought Kyrie opened up things a few times for him, especially when he would penetrate and kick and then get the ball to somebody else and then create that sort of domino effect or hockey assist effect to where Luka could then, split a double team before they even got there or attack off a closeout. And he was getting some buckets and getting to the free throw line by virtue of that. He went 11 for 15 tonight. He made some tough mid-range jump shots in this one, 2 for 7 from 3. He made a few solid threes, wasn't the most insane Luka performance of all time, but I mean, he had 33 damn good points in this one. And, the offense definitely looked like it was a little more put together, I guess, than it did last game. What did you have to think of his game today, Jaren?
Yeah, I think he was able to produce a level of like getting to the foul line that we really, haven't seen the last few games. Luka does, he's done such a good job all year, but he does such a good job of kind of dictating what happens in the paint on offense. And that's what we saw firsthand tonight. With the addition of Kyrie, we're going to see Luka take fewer and fewer shots. And I want to say, up until outside of like the games where he got hurt or got ejected, I want to say like 13 shots was like the least amount he had put up in a game. And only 15 tonight and, on efficient 33 points. I think that's sort of what the stat line we're going to see more and more of Luka.
No, I would honestly I don't even know. I think it's going to vary game by game between him and Kyrie, like who has a higher shot guy. Because going into the fourth quarter, Kyrie had shot way less, but then he seemingly just took things over from there.
Took over, yeah. Like I said, like we could see things, and he put up 20 shots. I apologize. But yeah, I just think the diet at which he was able to get inside the paint, and we've seen it so many times before, but he's just so dominant. Post fadeaway, whatever it is, he's able to knock it down, tough shot after tough shot, and that's kind of what we saw tonight. And this is a classic Luka game where he does a lot, but he doesn't do too much, or he doesn't look like he does too much. And thanks to Kyrie, I think that's really what kind of lets him able to free things up. But yeah, I was really intrigued with how those two played off each other. And I think that this is, as you said, this is by far the best of 2 games that Luka's played with Kyrie.
No, I would 100% agree. Next, I kind of want to get into some of the supplementary guys that were playing in that Mavericks small ball lineup towards the end of the game. Towards the end of the game, the Mavericks deferred to a lineup of Frank Ntilikina, Theo Pinson, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, and Josh Green. And, this was a happenstance that we really haven't seen too much this season. I think Reggie may have been in there at one point or another supplementing for one of those guys. But they went to small ball to combat Gobert, which was really interesting. And it did work from the perspective of combating Gobert, as me and Jaren had mentioned, from the perspective of once they start, blitzing him and taking him off the glass in this sort of combined effort as a means to stretch the floor upon the Timberwolves. And admittedly, like, things were opening up for them offensively a lot more. But obviously they suffered defensively from the Timberwolves point of attack ball handlers, Edwards, even Vanderbilt at times, just being too big of a body, and his versatility to be able to attack, as well as make it from the outside. And, the way he, is a solvent as a cutter, he's just such a dynamic, different sort of player. The Timberwolves were still able to benefit offensively, even when the Mavericks went to that small ball lineup. But, I do want to give a couple guys their flowers for how they stepped up. For all the discredit that we gave him in that, previous segment, I think for as good as he could have played, I think Theo did as good as he could have, right? He came in, drained 2 threes, and, he worked his ass off, like, admittedly. So I do appreciate that aspect of his game, as well as Frank, having really not played all game. I think he played a little bit earlier. He played some decent point of attack defense, and he made that 1-3 to cut it to 4 with a couple minutes left. So both of those guys, I did want to recognize a little bit. We obviously already kind of talked about Wood and how he was so uber efficient offensively, stretching the floor against that Timberwolves defense, taking advantages of mismatches. When the Timberwolves failed the scram switch, he was doing a really good job of, really sealing guys and, running the floor in transition a little bit too. And, once he's able to sort of get into the lane, he's able to slow step and Euro step to get to the rim. And he was just doing a good job attacking overall, barring obviously the defense, where he was just a complete saloon door tonight. JaVale barely played tonight, which, I don't know. He got beat a few times. I would have maybe liked to have seen his inclusion more to combat the size and force that was a Gobert and just the sheer pressure he puts on the rim at both sides of the ball. But nonetheless, he didn't really get too much run tonight. That kind of covers it for most of the bench guys. Jaden Hardy got a little bit of a go at it. He had 16 minutes, but he, you can see a lot of those were with Kyrie in those non-Luka minutes, and you just see, him playing off ball, the sort of stark difference that provides. If he misses like 1 or 2 shots early and he's unable to, get things going to the rim, he's definitely serves as more of a complementary piece offensively. And these last few games, he struggled a little bit more defensively versus how he had been faring earlier. So that's definitely something to monitor. But, the whole rookie wall aspect of things. Josh Green, a guy who went 3 for 11 tonight, didn't play his normal, just insanely good defense. It was still decent, but I want to get your thoughts on his game and how he was still able to affect the game, even amidst admittedly a pretty bad game, because there were some bouts in this one, but there were also some positives.
Yeah. So whenever it comes to Josh, this definitely wasn't his best game on tape or anything like that, but he still found a way to kind of, put his mark in the game. Still just a gritty sort of, aggressive sort of plays that he played, that he's sort of trademarked in his game. That's sort of what we saw with Josh. I know, offensively he had a pretty bad game, but even still he was open on a lot of threes. There was some stupid taking shots at times, I thought, or even just drives for that matter, where, thankfully Kyrie was able to clean some up. But I think, outside of that, Josh, it was, this is one of the more, I guess, one-off scenarios where he becomes not bad, but like even defensively, he was getting beat off the dribble. And I think that was kind of, one where the Mavs are on a 5-game away stretch and like this is their first game home. I think that, maybe settling in a little bit too much. I don't know what it could have been, but we saw that with a lot of players tonight. But even still, found ways to get it done, found ways to still find, to still get in the game. But like I said, he just wasn't, his usual Josh Green self. I know late in the game, whenever I think it was like 20 something seconds left, where the Mavericks, it was like 4 seconds separated shot and game clock. And in a scenario where I didn't think that it needed a foul, Josh fouled, I forget who it was. I think it was Mike Conley. He sent him to the line, and
Yes.
he went 1 of 2, and thankfully missed the second one because Mike Conley career is like 84% free throw shooter. But yeah, I just thought that was a pretty stupid scenario where 4 seconds is plenty of time to separate and get a stop, and you had 2 timeouts as well. But that was one where I think Jason Kidd quoted on it, or was asked about it in the post game, and I don't know exactly what he said, but I think it was just one where Josh Green's a young guy, and I don't know if he heard what I said, but he just went out there and did his thing. But even still, like I said, like he just found ways to get it done. But this is one of the more off-putting Josh Green games, I would say.
Yeah, no, I thought that he still, did all the sort of dirty work he usually does, as an off-ball screener, things of that nature, running the floor in transition. He did a good job tonight, passing, attacking the ball on rebounds, things of that nature. Especially, you can see the increased confidence even when he's missing in terms of his drives and the ability to dump it off to a guy in the lane. And he was a lot more savvy against Gobert than we saw in like last year's playoffs, for instance, when he tried doing a spin move and got swatted against him. So, I mean, he's evolving to a smarter guy, like right before our eyes too. Just, it was a bad shooting night. And on top of that, he went up with a few layups tonight that probably, they were debatable in terms of being able to get called for a foul. Just some tough shots and, attacking off some closeouts. The Timberwolves are a pretty defensively versatile team, of course, especially with Gobert, putting all that pressure at the rim. And that's where Josh gets a lot of his points. That's, I posted some stats on Twitter regarding all his respected, true shooting percentage, effective field goal percentage. And, he's at the highest markers in the NBA, doing all this while under 6'6". Like a lot of guys just can't compete with that, in terms of, most of the guys that are on that list are like over 6'10". So, in that top 5, top 10, like he is, in those categories. So, we do need to recognize that what he's providing on a nightly basis from that standpoint, his ability to attack and, off a closeout or just from the top of the key, or be a cutter and then finish in traffic, that is pure insanity. But, every once in a while, you're going against Gobert, who's already a good rim defender. Couple that with going over 5 from 3, he probably offsets some of his defensive confidence. He's going to have a negative regression game sometimes. And that was kind of seemingly the case tonight. Along with that, 2 other Mavericks that fared okay tonight. Dwight Powell, only 14 minutes. He played decent, stuck to his role in the dunker spot, had a few good roles. But, Gobert is just such a good center at hedging and recovering in the pick and roll, just covers so much ground. It was hard for Powell to get anything going, but he did have a few moments where he linked up with Kyrie when he was, playing more so at the second unit. Reggie made like 2 corner threes, but played some pretty suspect defense otherwise. He'd been playing really good, lately defensively, but, Edwards, went to another dimension tonight. So I don't know how much I want to read into that, but I mean, it was a decent Reggie game, but nothing too flashy, just regular 2 for 5 staff line. I mean, I don't know. I really don't have anything else in terms of how the Mavericks fared tonight. If we want to go to the Timberwolves side of things, we obviously talked about McDaniels. We talked about Rudy Conley. We talked about Ant-Man. We talked about Naz Reid. I guess we can talk a little bit about Kyle Anderson if you want. I thought he played great individual defense on Luka a few possessions. He sort of gets written off as a bad defender just because of the whole slow aspect of his game, but he's actually very laterally quick and uses his strength and length to his advantage. Just that offensive side of his game sort of provides a facade in terms of how he actually is as a player. But I was really impressed with how he was defensively tonight. And of course, with that playmaking aspect that he also provided, being able to get to the lane and just Euro step guys to death 12 points and 5 assists. I mean, 2 steals. He was and a block. I mean, he was an integral part of what, the Timberwolves did off the bench tonight. Taurean Prince had a few good shots tonight, solid 3-and-D piece, of course. He surprised me with a few possessions. Taurean Prince did. I think there was like one possession where, he had a sort of like spin move on the baseline, or something like that, where he was able to finish over the top of one of the Mavericks big men. And I was, readily surprised. The Mavericks, they have, of course, these 3-and-D players like a Reggie Bullock or Dorian Finney-Smith when he was here. But I mean, even looking at a guy like Taurean Prince, he's a 3-and-D guy, a pretty true blood 3-and-D guy for that matter. But even he has a little less one dimensionality to his game than some of the Mavericks guys, which this kind of sucks when you look across the league at just how one dimensional the Mavericks are with those guys. But nonetheless, I mean, Jalen Noel, he, came and provide that sort of off the bench scoring spark, hit a three. Barring that, they didn't really get a whole lot from Rivers or McLaughlin, who's recently coming off injury. So, I mean, I think that is a sort of sum of all parts for this game, Jaren, unless you have anything else to add.
No, honestly, don't really. I think that this is one where the Mavericks can hopefully work off of.
I mean, it was really fun. It was
actually
fourth quarter.
Yeah, that fourth quarter was actually really fun. Like
it was electric. The vibes in the arena with Kyrie doing all that in his first game, and the sort of eager anticipation that was provided from the Mavericks potentially being able to come up, or come back rather, was second to none. But they obviously fell short amidst a flurry of bad defense, mostly earlier on in the game. And we didn't even bring this up, but a big, downfall tonight was the offensive rebounding. Timberwolves had 10 offensive rebounds. The Mavericks ended up finishing with 9. But it almost seemed as if the rebounding battle, even though the Timberwolves, I think overall had 39, the Mavericks had 33. It just seemed as if the Timberwolves were getting the more crucial 50-50 balls in this one, even if they necessarily weren't. It wasn't some wide margin in which they were getting, more rebounds than the Mavericks. That they were just much more timely with winning a lot of those 50-50 balls. And, that matters. And the Mavericks are, that I get Gobert was in this game, so we can write it off from that perspective. But even so, there were some possessions where I thought the Mavericks could have emptied the tank a little more. So that's something to take into consideration as well. But barring that, just a really fun game where we saw Kyrie go off down the stretch, but the Mavericks just simply did not have enough to get it over the finish line in the end. I'll ask you one more time since, I kind of rudely interrupted you, but do you have anything else for this game, Jared?
No, honestly, not really. I mean, we got to, well, no, I won't add that, but Wendell Moore, he was supposed to be a draft pick. So I was just, I don't know. I was just looking at his stats. I was, while you were talking, I was just like looking at his stats and all that. And I don't know why.
Yes, he was selected with the 26th pick with which the Mavericks trade to the Rockets. That then ended up getting traded to the Timberwolves. Just a lot to explain, but nonetheless, that is the guy that got selected in the slot that we would have been picking at, that we ended up trading for Christian Wood. But nonetheless, guys, we appreciate you guys for listening to this one. The Mavericks got one more break before the Jaren. You're going to be proud of me. I actually got the time of the game.
See, I don't even know the time, but I know
it's going to be at 8 p.m. and it's not at home, I believe. It's back on the road, right?
It's back on the road, yeah.
It's back on the road. It's going to be at 8 p.m. in Denver on Wednesday night. Mavericks' last game before the All-Star break. Hopefully they go out with a bang. We need a really good, Kyrie and Luka game after this little 2-game skid. We're all in. The Mavericks have to keep winning. There's no sort of trade deadline to look to for them to see, are they going to take a step back? Like, no, this is the squad, barring some whatever they do on the buyout market. We did not cover the Jaren. I caught us last minute. We didn't cover the the Justin Holiday news. So
I thought we were gonna cover that in a separate podcast. That's why I was.
Well, I want to cover the player aspect of him in a separate podcast, but I did want to get your brief reaction to news and stuff at face value, and what, just a sort of brief hearing of what he could potentially bring to the table, and then we'll also get into the whole LaMarcus Aldridge thing real quick before we end this.
Yeah, no, I mean, like the very rare 3-and-D wings that are on the buyout market. He's one of them.
He's really the only one.
Yeah,
maybe besides Stanley Johnson.
Yeah, I was about to say. He's like he's definitely a 3-D player with the emphasis on the defensive side of things. His shot has, pretty
It
bad
has
this
abandoned
year.
him to an extent. But, this is also a guy that he has a relatively good track record, just being a pretty like stable 3-and-D wing throughout his career, but he's just had some slippage over the last few years as he's got a little bit older, especially on both sides of the ball. And you hope that he can sort of divert back to what he was just to an extent, especially in the lesser role where he's not being asked to do as many things. But it has been rough, admittedly, for him on those sides. There's a reason he's kind of getting bought out here and was traded and all that sort of stuff. So I'm excited to see what he brings to the table. There were obviously some other guys that I may have, personal preference. You can dip into, would you rather had Stanley Johnson and stuff? But I mean, these are guys on the buyout market. They all have their downfalls to an extent. You don't want to get too heavily intricate into psychoanalyzing who you would rather have over the other. Let's see how Justin Holiday performs. And then, if he really just absolutely sells and everything, there's a sort of trade-off factor there. Like if we would have got Stanley Johnson, is this fool's gold with his 45% 3-point percentage that he's had since he's been on the Spurs? He hasn't been able to furbish any sort of an offensive game throughout his whole career. It could easily turn the table on that. So let's go ahead and see exactly what comes out of this. Of course, he was really the only purebred 3-and-D player that can actually do both of those things, or has a track record of doing both those things consistently throughout his career. But it's also something that it shouldn't be looked as much heavily into when you're sorting throughout these sort of buyout guys until you actually see the results come out of it and you're able to make inferred assumptions and hypothesis versus just making baseless claims about who's better than one or the other, because admittedly we probably haven't watched most of these guys play a whole ton. So that's more sort of my brief synopsis on it. And then there's obviously a rumor going around that the Mavericks are working out LaMarcus Aldridge, who averaged about 13 points per game with the Nets last year, who came out of retirement after his heart condition was assumed to be okay. And, this guy who's a former net teammate of Kyrie Irving. This one kind of threw me under a loop, Jaren. I obviously described the whole Justin Holiday situation, but, just briefly talk about LaMarcus Aldridge and, was there a sort of, I don't really know what to gather from this, but was there a sort of shock factor from you when you saw that notification pop up?
No, I mean, so notably, I really didn't think much of it. I was just okay, veteran guy who's washed, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't even realize that he was averaging 13 points last year on pretty good shooting. I think it was 57%. So I didn't realize that he was doing those kind of numbers. But even still, I'm not looking too much into this. If anything, this is sort of the veteran type guy who, at the very best can offer you some sort of defense that can translate into offense. I think that he's throughout his career been able to do that pretty notably. But outside of that, I'm not going to take too much from it.
I think the only thing I take from it was that the fact that they're still looking assurance at the big man position. That I thought that the whole sort of ship upon Nerlens and all that, and especially with the comments Nico made after the trade deadline, everything definitely sort of gave me the prerogative that they were going to be going strictly for wings. And I don't know if it's because he was a former running mate of Kyrie or what, or Dallas native or what, but obviously this is a guy that's been one of the premier power forwards in the NBA throughout the 2010s. When the power forward was more of an established position, always been, maybe not much less a rim protector, but a really good one-on-one defender. Been a force on both sides of the ball. We obviously know his offensive game, the mid ranges, the post-ups, they speak for themselves. So, I mean, I still think he'd be serviceable. I still think he could guard in space a little bit, particularly on some 4s and 5s, provide a little ancillary, tertiary rim protection. So, I mean, shoot, I'd say go for it, if there's a guy that the Mavericks are willing to waive, but we'll get it more into that and the whole Justin Holiday situation on a separate podcast, but we definitely at least want to bring them up since those are, that whole LaMarcus Aldridge thing, I think, was dropped by Woj in the first quarter of today's game. And then the Justin Holiday thing, he's not officially signed by the Mavericks, but he has been bought out by Houston and is most likely to sign. So it could be another Terrence Ross situation as I covered on the last podcast, but hopefully not. But barring that, this is going to be it for today's episode. We will catch you guys Wednesday after the Nuggets game, unless the Mavericks do, sign 8 buyout guys in one day and we're just forced to podcast tomorrow. But nonetheless, We really enjoy and appreciate you guys. Thank you for listening this far in the podcast. If you made it this far, make sure to follow us on Twitter at mainstream_Mavs. Make sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating or follow, whatever term you wanted to note for it, on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, whether that be Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Leave us a review, give us a 5-star rating. Make sure to download, subscribe to the podcast. That'd mean a lot to us. We really appreciate that if you guys really do enjoy. If you guys are on YouTube, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, of course. And if you're on YouTube, I want you guys to comment down below. Who is your favorite team in the Big 12 in light of the LaMarcus Aldridge team, or the LaMarcus Aldridge news, rather? He was a former UT guy and, former Dallas native. Who is your favorite team in the Big 12? Comment that down on YouTube below if you made this far in the podcast. Yes, Jaren obviously has his opinions on this, but he's a biased source. We're not going to look to him in this instance. But nonetheless, barring that, we will catch you guys after the game on Wednesday, 8 p.m. versus the Nuggets in Denver. Number one seed in the West, Luka versus
in the Pepsi
Kyrie.
Center, the fake Pepsi Center.
Yes, the former Pepsi Center. Luka and Kyrie, round 3, third time's a charm. They're going to get a win this go around. I'm calling it, Jaren. They're beating the Nuggets best.
I think they beat them. Score prediction 128 to 121.
Booyah! You heard it here first on Mainstream Mavs. We will catch you guys.
Start betting
in the next one.
Bye.